what Doris has seen is not exactly what's going to be shown tonight. But I think it'll still be good. I've got a lot of pictures in this presentation, but I think we'll be able to look through this pretty quickly in the time allotted. So that's my hope.
Are you okay with the lights?
The lighting's good, yeah. Can you all see okay with the lighting and everything?
Yeah.
All right, good. So I just called this Cemeteries of St. Charles, 1769 to 2017. The flyer called it the St. Charles's Final Resting Places. I guess I could have called it even Grave Matters. To understand how cemeteries developed here helps to know a little bit about the history of St. Charles, and you all probably know a little bit of that. That Louis Blanchette founded our town. The traditional date is 1769. What eventually became known as Village des Côtes, the village of the Little Hills, originally called the Little Hills, Les Petites Côtes. Eventually came to be, over time, the transition was made to the name St. Charles we have today. There was a point in time when the Spanish even called it St. Charles of the Little Hills. So now, in 1809, the town was incorporated. In 1849, St. Charles became a city. And at the time St. Charles became a city, it stretched from Lawrence Street in the north to Barber Street in the south, and from the Missouri River in the east out to, I believe that's 8th Street in the west, because I do see 7th Street on there. Today it covers a lot more territory, as you can see, and there are, I've identified 25 burial sites. Come on in, please. 25 burial sites that, give me a minute, that we are going to cover. Take your time. Perhaps you're wondering, how in the world am I going to cover 25 burial sites in less than an hour? Well, we'll see how this goes. That should be fine, actually. Our first burial site is the St. Charles Borromeo Cemetery number 1, just a couple blocks from here. At least it was located a couple blocks from here, next to the Borromeo Log Church, a replica of which was built in 2004 to 2008. The Borromeo Cemetery was founded in 1789 and received burials until 1828. And there are several well-known burials there that have since received markers in the most recent Borromeo Cemetery, including Jean-Baptiste Pointesable, the founder of Chicago, and Louis Blanchette, the founder of St. Charles. Now, some burials were removed from the first cemetery, as evidenced by this stone, Anna Rice, who died on December 16, 1827, which was within the time frame of the first cemetery. Here's the log church that was built behind 401 South Main, and I understand that human remains were discovered behind 407 South Main in 1981 and were left there. This is a marker commemorating the church, and this is the sign talking about the reconstruction. And it's taken from an old city map. The Lindsay Burying Ground, the second site, dates from the 1820s. It's on property that was owned by Thomas Lindsay. Thomas Lindsay was originally from Scotland. He moved to Columbia, South Carolina in 1810 and arrived in St. Charles in 1816 and actually bought property down here on Main Street. 314 to 318 South Main is reputed to have been built by him and is the only portion of Stoner that actually dates back to that time frame. Today, that's the glass workbench. The Lindsay property, though, that the burying ground was located on, was a farm located near Elm Point, and this is the Lindsay family home, which I understand to also date back to the time frame to about 1816. The Schaefer Burying Ground is the first of the Boonslick Road cemeteries that I'm going to talk about. It's identified as being located in the rear of the Mark Twain Mall. The earliest burial here was in 1820, the latest burial was in 1866, and several graves from this cemetery were moved to Oak Grove in 1905. The Boonslick Road originally went straight into Block 19 at an angle, as you see here from the map that I showed earlier of the city of St. Charles, intersecting Barber Street and 3rd Street, and then continuing on down to Block 19. But in 1853, the city council rerouted Boonslick Road to, instead of intersecting Main Street at McDonough, it now intersects Main Street at where Chauncey Street used to intersect. The site is located, the site of the cemetery is located across the parking lot from Bass Pro Wear Shop, Bass Pro, in a vacant lot between Mark Twain Mall and Windsor Pentecost Church. The gate and some remaining markers were later moved by the family to Oak Grove Cemetery and are still there today. I should also say that most of these pictures, unless I've indicated otherwise, were also taken by me. I forgot to mention that. So, Lindenwood Cemeteries. Interesting thing about this is that the first burial on this property was in 1824. Those of you who know Lindenwood history, Sibley didn't buy the property until I think about 5 years later. There's 3 different separate burying grounds. These 2 are separated off by fences, as you can see here. And this is the second one. And on this property, you find the remains of Rufus Easton, who was an early postmaster and also the founder of Alton, Illinois. And of course, the co-founders of Lindenwood, Mary Sibley and George Champlin Sibley. George Champlin Sibley was also one of the commissioners of the report on the Santa Fe Trail. And they met in St. Charles. His diary doesn't identify where in St. Charles, but traditionally it's thought to have been Anchorage Tavern. The Sibley also traveled the Santa Fe Trail, so he actually did a journey and wrote a diary on it. And this is the earliest burial here. It's the Watson, John Watson, who died in 1824. The second Charles Borromeo Cemetery, number 2, and I was looking at this today and I realized I drew the red line a little bit too big. There's only 1 block, city block, not 2, so my mistake there. But it was located in block 122 on a site now occupied by the St. Charles Borromeo Catholic Church. So they had their cemetery there first, and then they later had their church. The church they had here was destroyed by a tornado in 1915, and according to Joanne Brown, when workers were excavating for a foundation for the new church to be built, they found human remains. The Millington Burying Ground was located at the corner of Kings Highway and Sibley Streets. Seth and Jeremiah Millington were doctors down there on Main Street, and they had their office on the side of 523 South Main. They later bought property further north on South Main. Jeremiah was in 332 South Main, and Seth was in 301 South Main. I think I remember that correct. Seth's building was the New York Governor Frenny is. Seth died in 1834. He was buried here. There were several family members of in this family that died from cholera during a cholera outbreak in 1833 and 1834. After Seth's death, the building on Main Street was actually rented out to his sister, Sarah French, and this is shown in the probate record. And Sarah's daughter, Celia French, married the abolitionist Elijah Lovejoy. Today, there's a house on the site. Now, this house was being built in 1904 for Anton Stoltz, a bartender on North Main. The workers excavating the foundation for this house didn't just find human remains, they found also remains of caskets, remains of 5 bodies over the course of 2 days. And historian Ben Emmons writes in 1935 that those remains were removed to Oak Grove, but Oak Grove has no record of that. So where were they removed? I don't know. There is a vacant spot I noticed between this house and the Quick Trip next door. The first city cemetery was cordoned off as a city cemetery in 1831 by order of the city council. A guy by the name of Montgomery Perry submitted a motion to have this block identified as the first city burying ground in 1831. And it remained the city burying ground, city cemetery, until 1856. After that, it was a city park. Then in 1905, the city sold it to a group of businessmen who were wanting to move a shoe factory here. In 1905, the Roberts Johnson and Rand Shoe Factory was built here. Human remains were discovered and removed to Oak Grove. Today, there's a shopping mall on the site. Dollar General's there. You've got auto parts store, a dance studio. A lot of businesses have been here. Medicine shop, Family Vision Library was in here. Star Stamps and Coins. According to the Assessor's database, this was built in 1965. The first Presbyterian Church cemetery also identified as High Hill Cemetery. I mentioned the cholera outbreak earlier of 1833 and 1834. And according to history on the hospital located on this site, the property was used as a burying ground for cholera victims of that cholera outbreak. When the First Presbyterian Church purchased the property in 1836, they were told no more burials on the property. Eventually, the Sisters of St. Mary bought the property for St. Joseph Hospital. And according to their records, in 1890, they were excavating for a foundation for the new hospital and human remains were discovered. Today, this is what's at the corner of Madison and 3rd. Freedom's United Church of Christ, which dates back to 1833 to 1834. The cemetery dates back to 1833. The church was officially established in 1834. Identified as the mother church to a number of other United Churches of Christ in the area. This is I believe the cornerstone from a previous church that was on the property, dated 1864. And I believe that translates out to German Evangelical Friends Church or something like that. Those who are more well versed in German than I probably would correct me on that if I got it wrong. Did I get it right? Did I get it right?
German Evangelical Friends Church.
That's what I said, yeah. Okay, good. The current church was built in 1957 and is still an active church. There are a number of burials in the cemetery. It is an active cemetery as well, so still receiving burials. Some crosses in this cemetery. There's some markers dedicated to pastors. I really thought this was a neat stone. It's got a vine going down the marker and the monument. And then there's another stone with a cross on top of it. Usually when I think of stones with crosses on top, I think of Catholic cemeteries. But this is one case of one in United Church of Christ Cemetery, and I've got another example of one later. And here's one here. This was a tombstone of one of the pastors, Philip, I believe it's, well, Goebel, probably in the German, I'll bet. Probably was an umlaut. But anyway, there's a little cross there, and it's got a line, so there's a lot of interesting stones in these cemeteries. There's one with kind of the handshake. You'll see old military markers, new military markers. You might see a softball. You might see an accordion painted on a stone. And on the front of the stone, the family farm, which 12 acres of their farm was originally sold to a developer for a subdivision. The Klinger family burying ground was located northwest of Freedom's United Church of Christ Cemetery. All burials were removed in 1924 to Oak Grove. And before I move on, the Klinger family had a mill down here on North Main. If you know where Gene's Shoes, I heard they recently moved. Is that correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
they still own the property, however.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cat still owns it?
Uh-huh.
Okay. So that building was actually on the site of the Klinger Mill building, and the Klinger family had that torn down, and the current building built in 1896. And of course it was J.C. Penney and Gene's Shoes. The William Eckert burying ground, and I'm grateful to Doris for bringing this one to my attention. Actually, she was in contact with an Eckert descendant by the name of Teresa Jackson, who was looking for William Eckert. And as it turned out, there was a deed record identifying him and being the center of 1 acre in Block 3 of Lot 1 of the St. Charles Commons, which I identified as being near Crestview Apartments. I don't know if I have that is an approximate location of where he was buried. I don't know that it's exact. Hard to be exact sometimes. And the story that I've heard is that when Crestview Apartments was being built, the owner discovered a box of bones and had them moved elsewhere. And I just right-clicked instead of left-click. Can you hit the escape button for me, please?
Yeah. Could you hit the escape button there? There you go.
Thank you. Today, these pictures aren't very clear. I was in a hurry to get down to the Festival of Hills on this day, but I did take a couple snapshots, and this is kind of what the apartments look like today, and possibly the area where William Eckert might have been buried. Manuel Lutheran Cemetery dates back to 1850, one of 2 cemeteries that date back to 1850 that are adjacent to one another. Emmanuel Lutheran Church was founded in 1848. It originally met on the Clay Road. Later moved to a church building that was First Presbyterian Church, and then they had their church they're built on the prior church, and then of course the current church, I think, dates to 1861. Cemetery also is still receiving burials. And here's an obelisk stone that I found an example of an obelisk here. And there's also, if you go to Oak Grove, there's an obelisk stone there. What's that?
Is that Southwood?
This is, yeah, I didn't get a picture of South Hader, but this is Waldeck is what the name is. Hermann Heinrich Sanford, that's an old St. Charles name. And sometimes you'll find Bible verses on the back of stones, like this one from Romans 8:38 and 39. Neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor any other creature shall be able to separate us from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus. And this is what the front of the stone looks like. So that's a modern looking stone. Here's another one. Obviously this was a Cardinals fan who loved baseball, and he didn't live very long. And sometimes you'll see poems on the back of the stones that kind of tell a little bit of the story. This is kind of a sad story. God saw he was getting tired, a cure was not to be, so he put his arms around him and whispered, "Come with me." A golden heart stopped beating, hard-working hands to rest. God broke our hearts to prove to us he only takes the best. And then I thought this was rather eclectic. Hollenberg, father and son, buried here. And I don't think I've seen another stone quite like that in any other cemetery I've been in. And I've been in quite a few. Here's another stone that's a little bit unique. It's got a kind of, I don't call it a picture or what that is on top of it, but it's, what's that?
An urn.
An urn, okay. Couldn't tell what it was when I was looking at the picture, so thanks. Benjamin F. Becker is buried in Emmanuel Lutheran, and this is his infant child, died at the age of 2 years in 1884. As you can see, it's the infant, and then there's a shell around it. Looks like it's been repaired a time or two. Next door to Emmanuel Lutheran Cemetery is St. Peter Catholic Cemetery. I grew up actually calling this church St. Peter's Catholic Church, and a lot of obituaries call it that, or we'll call it the German Catholic Church or the German Catholic Cemetery, because it was originally the German Catholic Church, formerly it's called the English Catholic Church. The church was founded in 1848. The cemetery dates to 1850, like I said. Now you have to be careful going in the cemetery, though. They have rules. They have rules here. As you can see, Warner-flated florals, no. No private plantings, freestanding statuary, votive or solar lights, shepherd hooks and potted plants, wind chimes and balloons. I've actually seen those in some cemeteries. Can't take your pets in the cemetery. Yes, you can. But I've seen people walk their dogs in there. Apparently you can't have a picnic in the cemetery. That's kind of a bummer. And don't be firing shots at the tombstones. Now, you know we're in a Catholic cemetery if you have a crucifix. And this is one of their ministers that died in 2007, Arthur Bromschweg. And there's several other crucifixes like that in the old section of the cemetery. I decided to include some Main Street people in here as well. Adam Angert, who actually had a business in this very block. Henry B. Denker, associated with ACF and also the St. Charles Car Company and Mayor of St. Charles. Joseph Seiling had a music store in 300 South Main, the building that's now Kilwins. Academy of the Sacred Heart. I brought my mom here for this part because she taught at the Academy from 1985 to 1988. And the Academy of the Sacred Heart, first burial there, I think everybody knows, is the founder of the Academy, Rose Philippine Duchesne, died in 1852, beatified in the 50s and canonized in 1988. The nuns also had a cemetery here, the Sacred Heart Nuns, which started in the 1860s. And it closed to burials in 1961. All the remains and all the stones were removed in 1964 and were moved to Calvary Cemetery in St. Louis. So instead of being a burial ground today, it's a playground. The current St. Charles Borromeo Catholic Cemetery has been on Randolph Street since 1854. And those three markers that I showed you earlier, under Borromeo Cemetery number 1,